Hello.
Hey, so this is the new link, right?
Yes, we're recording already.
You mean to pause that?
Yes.
Is there supposed to be sound?
Yes, it is. You can't hear?
No, nobody can hear. You have to.
I'm sorry.
Is the essence.
Let me start over.
All just laws.
Yeah, you might have to start over.
In the laws. And the
I'm hearing somebody else's sound.
And the only way we.
You have to share your audio. You have to stop sharing, and when you share your screen again, you have to click share audio.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a little box at the bottom left corner.
Psychology Student Association. I would like to introduce my executive board. We have Melanie County, who is my vice president.
Hi, everyone.
We have Pamela Davis, who's my secretary.
Hello, everyone.
We have Carolyn Thorpe, who is my public relations officer.
Hello.
We also have our advisors, Dr. Otis Williams.
Hello, everyone.
And Dr. Mark Bowden.
What up, what up?
All right. So at this time, we would like to acknowledge the mother, Kenethia Austin, and the uncle, Jay Brown of Jeffrey Price, and the mother of Marquise Austin, along with their families. We continue to support and honor these families and recognize that there has been no justice in their cases in Washington, D.C., despite the mayor's Black Lives Matter mural in Black Lives Matter Plaza. Now, at any time, if you have a question, please privately send your question to Carolyn Thorpe, and we will try our best to get all of the answers questioned from the panelists. At this time, I will hand it over to my Vice President, Melanie County.
All right. Hi, you guys. You may have already seen me. I was directing you over to this link, but I have the honor of introducing Dr. Iyelli Ichile, who teaches history in the Department of Social Sciences at Prince George's Community College, where she also serves as the director of the African American Studies Institute. She has a PhD in the history of the African diaspora from Howard University and a master's in African American Studies from Columbia University. Her most important education, however, took place in her mother's home. While in graduate school, she developed a research agenda that has been supported by the Smithsonian Folklife Center, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, the Reginald F. Lewis Museum, and several university grants. Dr. Ichile has taught at a number of colleges and universities, including Temple University, Montgomery College, Virginia Commonwealth University, Florida A&M University, and Goddard College. She considers it a privilege to also be the teacher and mother of an amazing daughter. Her work is an exploration of the roles of women of African descent in Black freedom movements. She specifically examines the connections between African military culture, spirituality, art, and interpersonal relationships as they relate to African liberation struggles. Can we virtually welcome Dr. Ichile to the panel?
Hi, everyone. I guess, am I talking now? I didn't know if everyone was going to be introduced and then we all talk. Okay, so hi, I'm so happy to be with you all this evening. I'm not going to talk very long. I really am much more interested in the dialogue. Hi, Norsha, that was one of my former students. And I just wanted to put a few things on the table for us to discuss. I consider myself a learner amongst all the other experts on this panel with this particular topic. But we had an incident at my college. I currently teach at Prince George's Community College, and we had an incident in October of last year in which some of our campus police attacked a student, a Black male student, over not having a student ID on what is an open campus. And there was a video, and the administration attempted to at least acknowledge the event, but there hasn't been a lot of follow-up on that. The student in question, the student who was attacked by campus police, didn't really want to kind of move forward with kind of political action around this incident. But what it did was it showed us a lot about the ways in which we in this particular county, being that the county is so heavily Black and brown, we sometimes take these racial issues for granted, as if when there are no white people present, there is no racial issue, there is no racism, there is no anti-Black action or behaviors or thinking. And we know that there's an issue with police in our area, no matter what color they are. We know that there have been other beatings. In June, there were police in this county who kicked a man after he was already in handcuffs. We have police who are committing rapes against our citizens, sex trafficking our citizens in this county, particularly young Black girls and women. All of this brings to mind the issues that our brothers and sisters in Nigeria are struggling around related to SARS. And so there's definitely a transcontinental, diasporic and continental conversation happening about this struggle against police brutality. We know that the police have been involved in a long and protracted war against African people and Indigenous people. I've been involved in a lot of conversations in which we're calling for the defunding and demilitarization of police. But I was thinking of something recently that it dawned on me that asking for the police forces in our lives to demilitarize at this moment in time is like asking your enemy on the battlefield to disarm himself, put his weapons down when the war is at its height. What we haven't done is fully accepted the fact that this is a war on our humanity, a war on our safety, a war on our mental health, a war on the thriving of our communities. This constant militaristic public and private approach to Black people is old. It is an old war. We have been fighting this war for more than 400 years. As many of you probably already know, this type of relationship between African people and police is just the most recent evolution of our relationship that began with slave patrols. And even before then, our captors on the continent of Africa. But it's not simply a problem that is institutional and related to police. It is a problem that has spread intentionally throughout the citizenry in our society. This is why the police mindset is had by many white citizens who believe that they can police Black people's lives and bodies, even if they have no badge, right? This can be taking the form of white citizens councils, neighborhood watches, Minutemen who show up at the border to help the ICE patrol, right? So the policing of Black people is a mentality before it is an institution. This is emboldened during the convict leasing era by Black codes. This is, in fact, we've only had laws that don't expressly target Black and brown people for maybe the last 80 years in this country. 80 years, as compared to 300 and something years of laws that are specifically singling out Black people and Indigenous people for torture, detainment, specific types of abuses, discrimination. And this goes back to the 1660s, at least in this particular part of North America. And even before that, if we're talking about the Spanish and Portuguese and their laws and their treatment and their policing. Because our brothers and sisters in other parts of the Americas and even in Europe are experiencing similar things. Just ask the Senegalese in France. Just ask, a Black person in Brixton in England, and you see the same phenomena. But I'll leave you with this, and I won't talk too long because I'm much more interested in what everyone else has to say. I'll leave you with where resistance begins. If the policing and the brutalizing and the militaristic attitude, the hostilities toward Black people begins in the mind, our resistance to that same treatment must begin in our own minds. Our resistance must be guided by a certain orientation to police, a certain ideology, a certain attitude. I wanted to read something to you since I'm the historian here, and I study slave patrols and our relationships with those and how old this carceral system really is. I wanted to read an excerpt, just a brief quote from a formerly enslaved man named Lewis Clark. And he was talking about not just slave patrols, but captains of slave patrols, right? So today we'd say chiefs of police, right? He says, they are the offscouring of all things. They are the refuse, the fag end of the cigarette, the ears and tails of slavery, the scales and fins of fish, the tooth and tongues of serpents. They are the very fool's cap of baboons, the echo of parrots, the wallet and satchel of polecats, the scum of stagnant pools, the exuvial, the worn out skins of slaveholders. They dress in their old clothes. They are emphatically the servant of servants and slaves of the devil. They are the meanest and lowest and worst of all creation. This is the attitude of a formerly enslaved man towards slave patrol captains and slave merchants and slave catchers and all who would have that same type of relationship to people like him. His resistance begins here. He's very clear on who his enemies are. He's very clear on one of the largest threats to his safety and his survival in this world. And I just hope that as we move forward and we have this conversation about resistance, we can move forward with such clarity. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you. Let's take about 5 minutes to, if anyone has a question for Dr. Iyelli.
I got a question in the chat. The book I just quoted from is a really wonderful book called Deep Like the Rivers, Education in the Slave Quarter Community. What enslaved Africans taught each other and discussed amongst each other, what they taught their children to know about the world. They had their own form of education, right? And then another book that I've been referencing is Torture and State Violence in the United States. It's a really good one, but it's not specifically just about race, but it definitely covers the slavery era, the colonization and genocide of Native peoples, and how and Jim Crow and kind of major legal cases and laws are related to torture and state violence. So this is another good resource. The references in here are better than everything else in here. And that one's by Robert Palito. I'll put his name in the chat too.
There's one more question for you, Dr. Ichile. What are some historical examples of enslaved Africans fighting off police?
Oh, wow. That's a wonderful question. The stories of slave patrols versus the Black people are many. You don't hear a lot of them, however, because when we look at the narratives of formerly enslaved Africans, we see a lot of the interviewers were white. And so a lot of those details you have to kind of read between the lines to try to get to the heart of what really happened. But Harriet Tubman has a number of stories about standing down slave catchers. And there's a lot to be found in our old folklore. A lot of stories. Gladys Marie Fry has a really good book about night riders. I'm gonna type her name in the chat. Gladys Marie Fry. A lot of people wouldn't read her book about night riders and Black storytelling about these night riders, but it was almost like these slave patrols were like boogeymen, the way that they kind of rolled up and terrorized our families. I mean, you'd rather run into a ghost than a slave patrol at a certain point. But we fought back. We fought back with whatever we had. I mean, there's stories about young women who, you know, took knives and did some special things with those knives, including one young woman in Baltimore who was being detained in like a slave pen. Many of those are down around Pratt Street, even that near the harbor. And you know, they were going to sexually assault her, and she was not here for it. So she removed a certain offending part of that man's body. I'm in my head, I'm always like, how much do I tell them? But yeah, we with whatever, we fought back with machetes, we fought back with juju. We've literally terrorized them back in certain instances by knowing about them more than we allowed them to know about us. That's a major strategy that's in this book. The first book, Deep Like the Rivers, it's a major strategy of like disinformation and just making sure that we steer clear of them whenever possible. And then, you know, sometimes we would have to just band together and just make some of those slave patrols disappear. You know, but working as a collective was always the best strategy and the most effective strategy. We often think we have to kind of like rescue ourselves one-to-one, and that I think defeats our courage. And when we think about getting organized, our mutual aid societies, so it's not just Black people in these just random groupings of people who happen to work on the same plantation, but they had these networks that we really don't think about, these invisible networks of people who would get together and mutually support one another and pool resources to go and handle a certain problem. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know if I answered the question, but I tried to speak to like the major themes within it.
Thank you. Carolyn, do we have any more questions?
No, that's all I have right now.
We have one more.
Dr. Williams says, do I recommend these strategies today? Absolutely. Absolutely. I was just having a conversation with one of my classes this morning about the protection of Black women who are experiencing such alarming rates of domestic violence and murder in our society, and trafficking. You know, and sometimes some of the people I ask, you know, particularly the brothers, you know, they're like, well, you know, I tried to defend the sister one time, it didn't work out for me. You know, I was out there by myself and I'll never do it again. And I'm like, well, why were you out there by yourself? We gotta be organized around protecting our communities and protecting each other. If you had a crew, it wouldn't have went down like that, you know? So I really think collective action is important. Even if that means community policing as an alternative. You know, if you go to Senegal and someone steals something from the marketplace, everyone will pull out whatever they got, a flip-flop, a stick, they will beat the crap out of that person before the police even have a chance to arrive and deal with the situation. And I'm not saying we should just start beating people in the street, but I think we have institutions where we've been more organized around regulating our society, regulating safety, and regulating people who come in with these misanthropic ideas and try to like cause harm to us, whether they're from internal or whether they're external. We've never not done that. So we need to get back to those strategies. Absolutely. Why not? If they had a right to them in a totalitarian, oppressive chattel slavery situation, we have no excuse.
All right. Any more questions, Carolyn?
Yeah, do we have time for one more?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Dr. Ichile, you touched on the mentality of white Americans regarding over-policing Black bodies and perpetrating white spaces. However, is there a historical basis for addressing reimagining policing while also addressing implicit biases and this belief of inherent criminality of Black people?
This question really, it sounds like there's a couple of questions in there. There's a question about maybe the relevance and how we reshape white attitudes, the kind of the anti-Blackness and the hostilities toward Black bodies and reading those bodies as criminal by nature, right? And then before that, there seemed to be kind of a question about, I don't know, I mean, I guess how do we replace, if we are against this type of policing, what do we replace it with? Mm-hmm. Is that, am I getting it?
I just sent it to you so you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
The mentality of white Americans, right? And perpetuating white spaces. Is there a historical basis for addressing reimagining police? Absolutely. A lot of what we're discussing now has been discussed before. We can look at the Black Panther Party for self-defense. We can look at, there are many organizations and entities that we've been having this conversation for many, many decades now. And, I think our ancestors have tried like every strategy. We've tried to tackle this from a lot of different approaches. And then, there are some of our ancestors who said maybe there's just got to be an adjustment in the thinking of white people. And addressing the implicit biases of white people. I don't choose to focus my energy there. I think once we get our minds right, it won't matter what they think. It won't matter as much. I think that it would be a huge energy drain to try to shift the thinking of white people, white Americans at this point. And I think the last couple of months in this whole election debacle has really showed us what we're up against. I think it would be a lot easier and a lot more meaningful and a lot more healthy for us to attempt to change our thinking and not worry so much about being in white spaces. And be much more concerned with building Black spaces, building them, defending them, maintaining them, seeking them out. I guess that would be my response, because this is again a much older conversation and it's been had, and I think ultimately when we think about shifting the thinking of white Americans, we can never trust that it's done. You know what I mean? I don't know how we can measure that and where we can find consistency in that when that's simply not a part of the mainstream view of that group.
Okay, thank you.
It was a great question, though. I mean, I'm sure I would love to hear some other answers to that, because I think community policing and control over how our communities are policed, if they must be, is something that we should focus on.
Okay. At this time, I'm going to hand it over to Pamela.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming again. I'd like to introduce Netfa Freeman. Netfa Freeman is an organizer in Pan-African Community Action, the events coordinator at the Institute for Policy Studies, and radio producer and host for Voices with Vision on WPFW 89.3 FM in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. So I guess just to give some of my initial thoughts, there's a whole lot going on there. I really appreciate the presentation by Sister Iyelli, who we've known for, for a little while now. And so we really see a lot of things the same. Let me start by talking about the origins of Pan-African Community Action, because that's, I think, most relevant to what we're talking about today. Pan-African Community Action is the organization that I belong to that's actually not more than, are we 5 years old yet? We might be 4. We started in November 2015, November 2015. And then the main thing that we formed around the killing of Alonzo Smith and Mulberry Plaza Apartments in Washington, D.C. By special police. And the special police are not the publicly mandated police force or by the state, but they're actually private police that corporations and businesses and people can hire to do security. And so that was a very interesting and particular concept that we won't really be able to go in. Well, actually we will, it's relevant to now. But in our Justice for Zoe campaign was also a call for community control of the police. We see ourselves as trying to pick up the mantle and the legacy of the radical Black tradition, like Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party. And we saw in this moment that we're still in that time, everybody knows that there was killing of Michael Brown and Freddie Gray and different people by the police, and that there were a lot of uprisings. So this was a political moment that was that is ripe for, revolution. And so we saw that we wanted to be in that. We formed wanting to inject in it a revolutionary Pan-Africanism. And so, and organizing for power on the local level. So on the local level, starting in DC, but we're Pan-Africanists. So we see our goals and our future and our connections as being inextricably tied to people of African descent everywhere in the world. I think that Dr. Ichile outlined how that connection is, so I don't even have to go into that. And so to speed this up, one of the things that is a tenet or principle, organizing principle of ours, is that the fundamental contradiction in what we're organizing for is power. Like the people we named in the radical Black tradition that we want to follow in, the question is power and not inclusion or reform, inclusion in a corrupt system, but our issue, and I think Kwame Ture used to always say it, is that we are not organized. We had to be organized, and we had to fight for power, and so it actually goes to the question that someone posed about, or that it came up, the issue of convincing white people. So we see racism as, if we look at it as an equation, it's racism equals power plus racial prejudice. And Kwame Ture was famous as saying that if a white man wants to lynch me, that's his problem. But if a white man has the power to lynch me, then that becomes my problem. So our issue is not the psychological problems that are infishing in white people's heads, but it's the fact that they can exercise and they impose that thinking and that mentality and their interest on us through power. So right now, I think that the fundamental, one of the problems that we see, or that we think is important for us to understand as a people, especially the role of police. Police are not, the police are not the police are there because of the oppressive system. They're there to enforce oppression. Oppression is not here because of the police. And so because of that, when our solutions have to be grounded in having to address the origins or the source of our oppression. Right now, we're seeing a lot of, and when I think about the topic that we're talking about in terms of defunding, and I don't know if it was said defunding versus community control, but it was defunding and community control. That we acknowledge that the whole lot of funding and the people's monies appropriated from them in the form of taxes is going to bloated budgets of police around the country and also the military, and that no one can argue against the need for taking that money or those funds and putting them elsewhere for the needs of the people and the needs of the world. However, that is not really something that can happen as long as those whose fundamental interests are realized through capitalism and white supremacy and patriarchy are in control. In fact, the military and the police are instruments of enforcing that paradigm. In the United States, we live in a settler colonial situation. This is a settler colony where people, what Europeans from Britain came here and settled here and decided to break from Britain and create its own country. And that's what we live in today. That power, the fundamental nature of that still exists. What settler colonialism is and how it expresses itself in this country is through the three-headed hydra of white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy. And we have to remember that. And that is enforced through the organizational enforcement of that is through the state. The state enforces these things, and that the police and the military are extensions of the state. And so without understanding that, I think it becomes necessary for us to understand that if we're to understand how to address this problem that we have about the repression of the state. We're in an interesting, I don't know if the word interesting, and we're in a critical time, a critical moment, and some would say every moment is critical. But as capitalism, late stage capitalism reaches was referred to as neoliberalism, the austerity and the automation of things and the commodification of things, all of that intensifying the class disparity and inequality. The state will have no other choice but to also intensify its repression of us. People will be in dire straits. They're going to want to protect their property, and those things are of interest of them. And those of us who are victims of this system are, and in the majority, because it concentrates as a consequence of it concentrating power and wealth and those things, then that means the majority of people will be outside of those things. And this is across race lines in this country, and actually in the world, but it's also manifested through and exacerbated through the racial dynamics of settler colonialism in the United States. So we're actually living in an unsustainable system that really has no other option but to intensify its repression. And through mass incarceration and police killings and those police, brutality. And it doesn't matter which party these political parties are in power, as long as these parties that subscribe to capitalism and won't admit it, but actually have to subscribe also to white supremacy and patriarchy, then we're going to face an intensified repression. Community control of police, and I think I might want to make the distinction here between community control of the police is something we've picked up as a campaign that we see as organizing the community. And I guess it's much more accurate, I don't know if Brother Darub is here, but accurate to really refer to it as community control of public safety. But it is really a way to create autonomous zones of power, localized organizing, so that people actually, and democratic localized organizing, so people can actually take control over public safety, and not just public safety, but a whole number of things: the economy, the systems of institutions of power, like judicial and those kind of things. We can implement our own institutions, and then as a campaign that we force the contradiction in this country of the more the centralized state control that goes, because in this country, even the police, and I don't know if people really understand how much the centralization of the police goes all the way up to the federal level. They organize police, and actually goes internationally. They organize international associations of police chiefs that travel around the world and train police forces and around the world. So what we're actually trying to do is create a expose the contradiction and use even some of their own disingenuous rhetoric against them that says that they're for democracy and things, and say, well, if you're for democracy, then there should be nothing wrong with us having community control over institutions like the police, and particularly police as the front line and the shock troops that they send in to occupy our communities. We want to make a distinction, but so community control of the police would be a concept in which we organize and we have whatever structures are necessary, like community control boards that will make decisions about the priorities and the policies of the police, what they're supposed to do, and the consequences if they do something wrong, that we control everything. And in fact, in such a way that that would allow the people to re-envision and reimagine what a force like this is, that is really to protect and serve the people, would look like. In fact, some of us have suggested that it would be so unrecognizable from what we call the police now, then it would really we wouldn't even be able to call it the police. We want to make a distinction between community control of the police and community policing. We hear that a lot. We want to make this distinction. It's very important distinction to make, because we've also in this new time have encountered lots of discussions about police, defunding police, abolishing police, community control of the police, and often we find that people are using them interchangeable: community control of the police and community policing. Community policing is a PR thing that comes out of the state that suggests that the community will work with the people to exercise criminal, fighting crime and all these kind of things, which would effectively mean that the community is being an accomplice to exercising settler colonialism, mass incarceration, police brutality, those kind of things. You get to know the officer in your community, and they're working with you to snitch on your family members and your people in your community. But we're saying that we reject that. We're not for community policing. We're for community control over the police. And if we want to call it something else, community control over public safety, what have you, then we want to make sure that it's clear that that's what we're for. And the distinction between community policing and community control of the police, they're not interchangeable, and they are, they're distinctly different. And I mean, we can even hear, in fact, like a good example was during the debates, the Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and this one of the debates, I think it was the first one that they had, the moderator asked him, are you for community control of the police, the Black Lives Matter community control of the police, which is complete misinformation right there, but he made a point of saying, I'm for community policing. You could tell he was not for this, whatever you're talking about, community having control of anything. And so there it tells you that that's something that the state embraces. So we want to get to this, the question of defunding police and abolishing police was just something that we have no problems with. We think that, however, though, that power is the essential issue, and that without power, we cannot, without the power to enact and implement any type of reform, and not whether it's reform is a radical reform or not, we can't realize anything. The state will not defund or abolish the police. So any demand that in which we can't organize around, that means that we have to organize the people and enact it, to have the ability to enact and implement certain things, really can be used against us, or can be not paid attention to. For example, defunding the police could allow and we've seen it, that in certain areas recently, where they just sort of fiddle with the budget and they reduce it a little bit and they do, shift money around here and there, but it doesn't change the power dynamics between the people and the state. And this is what we have to be focused on. An abolitionist framework presupposes that the power of the people will be able to be realized, and that those who benefit from the current situation will not have will not be left up to making the changes. Also, last, and I'll wrap this up. We also know that no matter, so one, community control of the police, as we see it, the Pan-African Community Action, we would challenge the state through a ballot initiative asking for community control, but also, and the most important part of it, even more important than the ballot initiative, is that we're organizing the people. We're organizing committees and councils and caucuses and structures that the people would need in order to exercise self-determination on the local level. So it's not just community control of the police, but community control over everything, our food and whatever else we can do. And those things we'll find that if we don't address all of those things, try to have some sort of program and strategy that addresses all of those things, not even one of them will work by itself. And so that's our position. And so what we're really looking to do is to organize, and we think we're seeing this around not just the country, but around the world, where people are realizing that they have to organize autonomous zones, autonomous zones that can exercise an independence from state structures, from the oppressive state structures that are governing our lives. And we have to do it regardless of whether it gets sanctioned from the powers that be. But at the same time we're organizing it, we also have to challenge the powers that be through being in the streets, through demonstrations, direct actions, and all that, but also by trying to wage campaigns, like, for example, in community control. And I forgot to mention, I'm going to mention, I can't not mention the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression that we're also a member of. We just joined. We have to challenge for community control through either a ballot initiative or through some type of city council mandate or something like that. Different places will have different ways of doing it, but we have to make sure that we challenge the state while we are also organizing internal to our people, and that we also connect the organizing and the survival programs and everything that we can muster, the mutual aid. We have to connect it in a way that helps us build transcontinental connections. The National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression was an organization that was formed in the early 70s, but then also because of different things that happened, a lot of people should know about COINTELPRO and counterintelligence program and other issues, had to discontinue. It was reformed just last October, and we as the organization, several other peoples, convened in Chicago and reformed, established the refounding of the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. Several organizations across the country are members of it, and the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression also has as its primary mandate making community control of the police a national campaign, and trying to organize people to try to realize that wherever we are. And I find it interesting that right now when that took place, it was just before the pandemic, just before what would be called the George Floyd uprising, that we're hearing calls for other things, and there were even being suggestions that community control of the police is in contradiction with or antithetical to abolishing the police. I think there's a lot more to be said about that in terms of a realization of an abolishment. That's a very much more complicated and long-term thing, but I think that we got to get it, and we will have to have that conversation. But right now we have to organize for power, and we have to start with the frontline troops that are enforcing the repression we're facing as a result of neoliberal capitalism, late stage capitalism, and turning into fascism. So that's my initial remarks, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. We have time for one question. Carolyn, you have one?
Yes. What do we do as a community when it comes to our very own who are police officers enforcing those same laws on our own community? Do we as a community not support people who are officers?
So I think it's not an individual question, and it's definitely not a question for us supporting officers. It really should be a question for those individual officers to have to take a position. Do they support the community? And if we are organizing ourselves and challenging the repression of the state, and we have campaigns like community control of the police, for example, if we say, just give it like a hypothetical, a community wins like community control of the police, or we're fighting for community control of the police on the ballot. What is the position of that police officer? Are you not for the democratic organizing of their community with participatory democracy and popular people's assemblies for deciding what way any force is allowed to carry guns or whatever is in your community? They have to begin to realize that they're actually fulfilling the enforcement of the state, the repressive apparatus. That's just imperative. And it's not on us to support them. It's on them to make a decision or whether they want to continue to support the state.
Okay, thank you. We only had time for one question. I'm going to hand this floor over to Raven, our president.
Thank you. African psychology is responsible for including intergenerational discussions that feature our Jegna. A Jegna is an Amharic term for a warrior who has returned from battle to instruct the younger warriors in the warrior arts and train them to fight better. The Jegna Ethiopian history fought for Ethiopian sovereignty against Italian fascist colonizers. They fought victoriously in the Battle of Adwa against a more well-armed Italian army. So tonight we have invited one of our own Jegna, Daruba bin Wahad, who was a warrior, organizer, former field secretary for the Black Panther Party, ex-political prisoner, and continues to be a freedom fighter for political prisoners and African liberation across the globe. Daruba, if I may, would you please focus on how we form a movement that doesn't make the mistakes of the past and how we understand fascism beyond Trump?
First of all, can you hear me? Does everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we hear you.
First of all, right on to Nefta. I think he summed up a lot. He encapsulated a lot, and I want to thank everyone that invited me onto the Zoom, and so let's get down to some basic stuff. I think that one of the things that we really have to understand, as Nefta pointed out, the organization of community control of public safety. And when I use the term public safety, I use that term to not just encompass policing, because there's different facets to public safety as well as just policing. There's public safety involves community health care. It involves responding to the needs of the community, even all the way to the areas of sanitation and housing and all of these things. So I just want to say, and I think there's a lot of activists on the line, that when we talk about community control of public safety, the history that we have and that we found is that if we talk in vague terms, if we talk in general terms that are non-abolitionists, that are reformed, that we're not going to be successful. We have to understand who is behind the police, what gives the police their political power, their political leverage with the political establishment, with the establishment, and that is the police unions. And we have to understand that right now, months ago, we should have filed a class action against the 5 major police unions in the country to have them decertified. It doesn't matter whether we win the legal struggle for their decertification or not. It's the struggle to decertify them that matters. The decertification of the police is paramount because, as Nefta pointed out, we're dealing with a capitalist system. And this capitalist system and this historical moment that we are in a crisis. And this crisis is verging on a neo-fascist moment, a neo-fascist phase, in fact. And we know historically from studying and understanding fascism in its various permutations, that fascism requires a national police force in order to implement its power. We know that when Hitler came to power, he had to basically dismantle the regular police force and institute his brown shirts and establish his own militarized police in order to carry out his control of the the German state, the national security state. So we have to understand that I think that one thing that many activists do not really fully appreciate is the fact that we've already won this struggle, that we're already victorious. The mere fact that the enemy has gone to the lengths that they have gone to in order to repress this popular movement, in order to repress and delegitimize and contradict the thrust for community control of public safety, for control of the police, is very, very telling. When we talk about community control of police, we're talking about essentially decentralization of law enforcement. Decentralization means we want to interdict, to disrupt, to change the command and control structure of the armed agents of the state. We have to understand that the police are the armed agents of the state. They're not workers, okay? So the false paradigm, the false solidarity with police unions that other unions exercise is based on the assumption, the misassumption, that the police are workers, and the police are not workers. And they have the power of life and death in their hands. They function as the armed agents of capitalism, of the state, of the elite. Their control is very important to the powers that be, so to speak. It's very important because the major focus of policing has always been control of property. And African people at one time in history were property. That's what 3/5 of a human being constitutes. So it's no coincidence that the police treats us as an extension of white supremacist extensions of property, of ownership. They own our bodies. They own it to the point where they can kill us. So when we come up with a hashtag slogan like Black Lives Matter, we open up ourselves to a whole plethora of counter arguments that the enemy could use against us to muddy the waters. Black lives have never mattered in America. We need to understand that. It was always a question of mind over matter. White folks didn't mind and black folks didn't matter. So we should really understand what that means. What that means concretely is that unless we abolish policing as it's presently constituted and interrupt this command and control structure so that the political elite, the corporate elite, that money, that Zionists cannot control policing in our community, then we are not going to go anywhere. The police will not back down. They will not back down. And we need to understand that. And I was just looking at some statistics from an organization that is on the front lines there in the streets, and they showed that the demonstrations that were occurring in June and May have plummeted because of police repression. Over 20,000 activists have been run through the court, and they're not being arrested for unlawful assembly or disorderly conduct. They're being arrested for instance, obstructing interstate commerce. They're being arrested for destruction of property and all of this stuff. And these are some more serious charges, and there's a reason for that. Because the majority of young people on the streets are not in touch with their radical history, with the radical tradition. We done been here and did this before. We know what they're going to do. They have a playbook, and they go to their playbook. If we look at most of the debates between presidential candidates going all the way back to 1960 with Nixon and Kennedy, we see that they're using the same rhetoric in 1960 they're using now. Why has America lost its mojo and its leadership, that we need to come together as a nation? All of this stuff. We need to understand that what we have to do is take initiatives that will ensure our victory or ensure the victory that we've already achieved. And that means that, for instance, to give you a practical organizing tool, an organizing point, we need to organize this mass movement. Mass mobilization is not organization, and we need to organize it. And as Nefta pointed out, the reestablishment of the national front to against racism and police brutality that was reconstituted in Chicago is one step. If we look at the history of the Black Panther Party, we see that in 1969, the Black Panther Party organized the national committee, a national conference to combat fascism, a national front to combat fascism. And it called together every major organization in the country at that time that was demonstrating against racism, that was demonstrating against the wars in Vietnam, that was demonstrating against migrant workers and their rights in the South. We called them together and over 8,000 people showed up. And from that initial organization, we established over 20 chapters of national committees to combat fascism in each city where the people came from. And the purpose of these national committees were to do exactly what Nefta was talking about. Put on the referendum, community control of police, not decentralization of police. We weren't talking about community policing, as Nefta definitely pointed out. We were not talking about community review boards, which is, in fact, is what they flipped it to. And that's what came out of that was community review boards. But we were talking about decentralization of police. We got to understand it. That's very, very important. Defunding the police, that's okay, okay? But we know, as that was pointed out too, and Nefta pointed out, that that just to defund the police doesn't change the police ability and militarization or ability to inflict the type of control they do on our communities. So we have to talk about why are the police so unable to respond to concrete abolition and change? And that is because they're armed agents of the state. And this is something that we really, really got to drive home to activists, that these are not just cops coming punching the clock and workers. They're not workers. This is why the police unions are forbidden to call a strike. Police can't go on strike. This is why they use terms like blue flu when they want to get their beef off, or they feel that they got something that they want to be recognized. But they form political pacts. They form political alliances with the political elite, so that anyone that runs for political office, if they don't get the endorsement of the police union, they're gonna have a hard time. They're gonna be called soft on crime, soft on law enforcement, and all of these things. So we need to understand this, the police union that we have to take down. And the way we go after them is very, very simple. We need to file a national class action. We need to get activist attorneys to come together and form a class action against the 5 major police unions in the nation and push for their decertification and say, and we have the documentation to show this, that they interfere with policing on our local levels. They interfere with policing policy in the Black community. They don't live in the Black community. They don't represent the Black community. There has to be residency clauses when we talk about defunding, when we talk about decentralization of police. We have to take away their command and control structure. We have to take away the ability of mayors and city councils to appoint a police chief themselves. We have to put that in the hands of public safety boards. So the community then can take their own positions on how policing should go down in their community. We need residency clauses for cops when they first become cops so that they live in the communities, which means that real estate has to set aside certain types of housing for police officers who are going to live in our community. Their children should go to our schools. So if they go to our schools, we don't have to have shakedowns at the schools and gun booths and metal detectors, and our schools look like prisons. So we need to understand that the police right now are the Achilles heel of white supremacy and the national security state. And without the police, the national security state cannot function as it's presently functioning. Now, by that, I mean this. The national security state that we're talking about, that has come up to where it is now. The consolidation of white supremacy in the right wing has been going on for the past 40 years in this country. And at each point in this consolidation, it has been Black uprisings and rebellions of people of color that have slowed that consolidation down. But they persist. Both Democrats and Republicans persist on doing it. They start with the Omnibus Crime Act in the 1970s, then the new criminal one that Clinton and Biden and all of them passed. And if we look at these historical moments, we see that Black leadership, the present Black leadership, the Congressional Black Caucus, these boule niggas, excuse my language, these Black folks have endorsed this police repression in our community. And they've endorsed it under the pretext of fighting the war on drugs. But who initiated the war on drugs? Where did the war on drugs come from? It came from Richard M. Nixon. And he stated that the war on drugs was designed and aimed at the so-called counterculture of Black people, the anti-war movement, white hippies who have tuned out, and they wanted to criminalize marijuana. They wanted to criminalize drug addiction, but they're the ones that introduced hard drugs into the Black community at the end of World War II. So we need to understand the paradigm that we're in. If you don't study your history, you're going to reinvent failure. And that's what these young folks are doing in the streets. They're about to reinvent failure. And that's because we're not organized. We're mobilized, but we're not organized. And many of these young folks who are in the street have no experience with law enforcement. They have never been in jail. They have never been in prison. They have never gotten beaten up like this before. So they're totally terrified when they run through the system like this. They're intimidated. And this is why you see the demonstrations that have dropped. This is why you see a lot of activists say, man, you know, nothing's going to change. And then the boule Negroes come along and talk about, well, we got to vote, okay? And if we got to mobilize for the vote. Now, as a revolutionary, I understand the utility and efficacy of voting as an organizing tool. It's not going to empower the poor people, but it's essential that we take control of those institutions that affect our daily lives. Everybody, everywhere understands that all politics is local. It's local, whether Trump is in power or Biden is in power. That's where we have to begin to understand then where our domestic colonization intersects with other oppressed people around the world, and how that brings about the type of solidarity and the type of unity that we need internationally. It has to be noted that when George Floyd was brutally and viciously murdered, and the image of this went around the world, people took to the streets everywhere. They took to the streets in Beirut. They took to the streets in Lebanon. They took to the streets in Syria. They took to the streets in Hong Kong and said Black Lives Matter. And some of these countries don't even have Black folks. What mattered was they realized that kneeling in the neck was symbolic of the way the police in their own countries were kneeling in their neck, denying them their rights, denying them their freedom. So we see that finance capital and the military and militarized policing is a feature of modern capitalism. And it's a feature that we have to go after. We have to go after wholeheartedly. And we have to understand how movements have been crushed and diverted in the most recent past, how they did that, and avoid remaking those same failures and mistakes. So I just want to say here that I think Nefta summed it up very, very succinctly, that what we really want to do is we want to take the command and control structure of local law enforcement away from the politicians who do not have our interests at heart and put it in the community's hands. And this means decentralization of police. This means community control of public safety. This means going after the police unions in a unified and movement manner for their decertification. We have to present a class action against them for their decertification. And this is very important. And I think that we could prove, at least on paper, that the police unions that have acted outside of the parameters of any type of certification that they had to protect their constituents. They use the money that they raise to invest in the arms industry. They use the money that they raise to carry out, to lobby for policies that are anti-community, that are against our best interests. And we need to really understand that. And I just want to address something that the sisters asked about how do we deal with Black cops. And the way we deal with Black cops is the same way any revolutionary movement deals with those who are in the ranks of the enemy. Okay, we try to give them an opportunity to come on the side of the police, and if we don't, then they are enemies. And we should understand that. We should understand that I know from personal experience some of the most brutal cops when I was growing up. In order to show their white partners that they were on the same side, that they all bled blue, they used to beat our brains out. Okay, I have no sympathy for Black cops if they do not stand up for the Black community. And one way we make them stand up for the Black community is that they have to live in the community that they police. Don't take the civil service job and then you move out to the suburbs and then you come back in the community telling us, well, you here to protect us. If you was here to protect us, you would be here with us. Okay, what are you protecting? You're protecting the property of the property holders of the oligarchy that runs this country. So I want people to understand one thing that I really, really want to beg everyone that's on this call is to put forward to their organizations. How could we mobilize nationally a lawsuit to go after the police unions, the Fraternal Order of Police, the Chicago Police Union, the new NYPD Police Union, the LA Police Union, there's 5 or 6 major unions. We need to have this class action. We need to have every organization that's talking about defunding, decentralization, or whatever sign on to this lawsuit as members of this class. And we need to bring this to the courts. We need to bring this into the media. We need to bring this idea that people should control the police in their community and the police should live in the community they patrol. And finally, I just want to say that white folks already have community control of police. If you go anywhere in Georgia and you go to any one of these counties, you see that the people in those counties have their own public safety board. They know the policemen that's on the police force. Many of them went to the high schools and middle schools in those areas. Their families live there. So the most rural white folks, most white folks in middle America already have community control of police. It's the Black community that has an occupying army that sits on our necks and protects property and tells us that property rights are more important than our human rights. So I just want to say that, there's initiatives that we can take, but I think right now at this particular moment, especially after this election, and especially given the pushback that the police are going to push back with, that we should move for their decertification. And that means we need lawyers to come in and study this data, to bring up a principled lawsuit that will go directly to the fact that the police unions have gotten over with protecting police who have committed crimes, who have committed murder. The Constitution is not sufficient for them. They have extra constitutional rights that ordinary people don't have. Some police departments, they could kill you tonight and nobody could ask them a question for 3 days, for 72 hours, okay? And they get automatic psychiatric treatment. They get all of these things and they get protection from the police union. And meanwhile, the victim is usually dragged through the press as someone that had problems with law enforcement or mental disease, or he was a drug addict. And by the time this gets to the grand jury, or by the time it gets into court, we know there's nothing going to happen to this cop. So we need to understand that we have already won the struggle about law enforcement being an occupying army in our community. I think that a lot of young folks do not really understand that Black communities in America are basically Bandustans, that we are a domestic colonized people. We're not just the minority. We're a domestic colonized people. If you look at the term colony and look at what defines a colony, almost every urban Black community fits into that paradigm. Lack of economic control. They work outside the community. The community has no political power. It has a neo-colonial elite who are put in place by the mainstream, main political powers. So I want people to understand that community control of public safety is a deep issue and it's a serious fight. We're not going to get this. They're not going to roll over for this, okay? But we know from New York, where we did get on the ballot, community control of the police, exactly how the union intervened. The union, the PBA in New York spent over $3 million to confuse the electorate. They said to the electorate, vote yes if you mean no for community control. Vote no if you mean yes for community review board. And they confused people. And what came out of that was the community review board. We never asked for a community review board, okay? It was the police union that put community review board in one of the alternatives on the referendum, not us. So we need to understand that we can do this. We can do this from city to city. We can create liberated zones. And finally, I want to say that what goes hand in hand with this is how do we organize the street sets in the community, the so-called gangs? How do we put them on the right side of the barricades? And I think that this is very, very important because the gangs do know that the biggest gang in the Black community is the cops or the police. And they are the first ones that are dealt with in this vicious manner by the police. We have a generation of tribes that have arisen. Some of these kids have their grandfather and their father and their mother and their uncle were all Crips, were all Bloods. And so they feel growing up, that's their tribe, okay? But what has the police done? They have gang units that have targeted these gangs, that have targeted the culture of the street and used the culture of the street to justify law enforcement policies. And this goes all the way into the prisons. I could go on and on about this, but I just want the people to understand that this discussion about community control of public safety is about local empowerment. That's what it's about. It's not about so much national issues on that scale. It's also a roadblock to the consolidation of fascism, because fascism requires a national police force. And the United States, by writ, does not have a national police force that the president could call up and say, okay, close every street in the neighborhood, and this is what the policy is going to be. This is where we can use the conservative struggle for the last 50 years for state rights against them. Because state rights, look at the COVID crisis. You know, everyone's calling for a common policy from the central government, from Trump, and he has no policy, of course, because he's orange man is an asshole, excuse my language. So he ain't had no policy, and I don't even think the boy could read. But he has no policy. So the states, all of these policies have devolved to the states. Okay, and we see how the Republicans have suppressed votes in every state, how they've managed to take control of these state legislatures, even in states where the major city is predominantly Black. Look at Atlanta. Look at how they jacked the vote with Stacey Abrams so that she wouldn't get elected, and you got this piece of shit in government. I am a profane brother. You have this cracker in government, and he gerrymandered the votes. I mean, he stole the election. Talk about stealing elections. It's the right and the conservatives have historically stolen elections from Black people from time immemorial. So I just want to end by saying, let's think about taking the initiative in this community control of public safety and understand the ramifications of it locally, statewide, and nationally. That this is a struggle that we can win. This is a struggle that we can get police departments broken up into public safety zones. We can do this. And we just have to be focused and have a strategic vision, and we need a united front. We need a united front against fascism.
Thank you so much. For those of you that can physically stand up, would you please stand and give a round of applause for Daruba Ben Wahad, please?
Oh, y'all didn't give Nefta one.
Brother, I don't even know.
I appreciate that. Thank you, sister.
Thank you. Carly, we have any questions?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Police brutality creates generational trauma. So how do we start the healing process? Do we improve the mental health of the people, or should we improve the social conditions that affect the mental health of the people?
Well, I think that we have to really do both, but we first of all have to understand why, how the system actually works. What is mass incarceration? You know, we're talking about emptying out the prisons. We know now from seminal works that were done, like the new Jim Crow, that mass incarceration was actually a pushback against the empowerment of working class Black people. It was designed to take the surplus labor that came after chattel slavery was abolished and criminalize it and use it for profit for the state. That's what mass incarceration basically can be summed up to, summed up. So when we talk about the trauma that we have suffered from the bullwhip days until now, that trauma has always manifested itself into young brothers and sisters like yourselves who have taken to the streets and demanded radical, if not revolutionary change. You are the consequences of the residual absentee slave mentality. You are the new African. And so you have claimed your mind and your body and your understanding, and you have taken to the front line. So how do we deal with our community then? What would we do, for instance, if we emptied out the 2-point-something million people in jail and brought these brothers and sisters back into our communities? We don't even have enough jobs for ourselves now. How do we put them back into our community? This is where community control really, really counts, okay? We have to be our own first responders. You know, the Michigan militias and all of them started when FEMA started giving money to different types of organizations so that they could train to be civilian first responders to natural catastrophes. This money is still made available to us. It's still there. We need to train young people into how to take care of our communities. I just want to say something, and I don't think many people really fully appreciate this. An urban city, a major city, a village is an organism. It's a living organism. It has a circulatory system. It has a heartbeat. It has a pulse. It has a nervous system. And when you are in a community like, say, New York, and you have Black communities in New York, when we ask ourselves, well, what would happen if they turned off the water and it never came back on? What would we do? Ask yourself what that question. What power do we have? We go to the water company that we've been paying the bills for, that would turn our water off if we didn't pay the bill. What do we do if they turned off the electricity in the Black community? What would we do? How would we live? How would we get our elderly from the top floors in the projects if the elevators are not working? We have to be our own first responders. And what I mean by that is, when the elevator's broke and you call a guy to fix it, who comes and fix it? Somebody that looks just like us. That probably lives down the street from us, okay? When they digging the cables in the streets and the guy is out there waving the flag for you to bypass, who's waving the flag and who's down in the manhole fixing the cables? Somebody with dreadlocks that looks just like us. When we get a TV, a problem with our cable, and we call the cable guy, who comes to fix the cable? He goes outside, he tells you that we got to do this, we got to do that. We know how the system works. We the ones that maintain it. So why don't we train each other? Why don't we organize our workshop so we can be our first responders? So then we can go to our people in our community. We can go to the faith-based community and say, Reverend, we want to set up a solar-powered generator that could provide emergency electricity for 3 square blocks here, okay? That technology is available. I know I live in Africa, I do it every day, okay? That technology is available. We could put the generator wherever we want to put it. We could hire young folks to maintain it. But now, if the lights go out, we could put our own lights back on. If the water gets cut off, it's a little more complex, but that can be dealt with too. So we have to understand that when we talk about community control, it's not just something that's an abstract. It's something that goes to the very a center of our people's survival on a daily basis. And people can understand that. And that's how we have to organize them. Unfortunately, the technology that we're using right now has intercepted and interdicted between the people having face-to-face relationships, organizing relationships. In the 60s, we didn't have this media. So we had to go out into the streets and hand out leaflets in the subway. We had to actually go into apartment buildings and talk to people. We had to knock on their doors. We had to do this. We had to convince people not to pay a landlord that didn't provide heat. And if everybody didn't pay that landlord, we could take that money, put it in the escrow, buy a boiler and put it in ourselves, and then ask for the landlord to be certified and declare this a collective, co-op. Okay, these were struggles that we did and we won. We won these struggles, okay? So what I'm saying to you, we need to get off these Zooms and we need to zoom our ass out there onto the streets and start to mobilize people around those needs that they have on a daily basis. That's what we really, really, really need to do, because it's the people that are the basis for anything that we're going to do and for any power that we will derive from that. And finally, I want to say that in Gary, Indiana, I believe it was in 1970, it might have been the early 70s. Black people came together, Black activists came together after the counterintelligence program has devastated the liberation movements and the civil rights movement of the 60s to form a Black political party. The idea of the Rainbow Coalition was an idea that was established by the Black Panther Party. Okay, we had the Brown Berets, we had the Patriot Party of young whites in Appalachia. We had the Young Lords. We had Abu Kwan, the Asian Americans. We had all of us form a coalition called the Rainbow Coalition. Of course, Jesse Jackson and some other pork chop preachers hijacked that and used it to pimp and pressure corporations to put Black faces in high places. So I want to say to you, we need to organize an independent political party and a working class party, a party that's led by the most abolitionist and revolutionary elements that we have amongst us. And this party will allow us then to consolidate the type of power and community control that we're talking about, and then use that in terms of putting in check the right wing and the left wing of this buzzard called the United States of America. So I just want to throw that out there, that we should not give up on a people's party, on a working class party, or at least on a working class initiative that transcends just union allegiances, but deals with capitalism. It has it how it in a way that empowers our people on the local level.
Thank you so much. If I can ask each panelist, how can we follow you on social media and how can we support your movement? Also, if you'd like to put it in the chat, that would be great.
Well, I'm working with community builders here in Atlanta, and many of you may know of community builders with Kamal Franklin and Kalanji here in Atlanta with the Free the People movement. And I've been working with them, but mainly I'm in Africa, and I have a NGO there that's connected to 501c3 here called Community Change Africa. And it's about training young teachers and young people like yourselves into mobilizing their communities to carry out certain types of changes that empower them, microfinancing and stuff like that. I think that I have a webpage, that's my name at g.com, darubabinwahad.com. You can reach me on that. You can reach me through Community Builders as well. I'm on Facebook and the social media. My tweet name is DBW, that's capital D, capital B, EEW. And they could reach me also. My email is Daruba, my first name, @gmail.com. And I could be reached there. That's also the same handle that's used in my PayPal. But I just want to say that it's very, very important, and I just can't emphasize this enough, that we have to translate this mobilization, especially as the winter months begin to close in and people start to, the demonstrations start to wane a little bit. We really got to consolidate ourselves so that by the springtime, we have a number of things going where we all have a common strategic vision. We can't rely on hashtags to define our movement. We have to understand the value of slogans, the use of slogans to organize people. When we say Black Lives Matter, and it's a hashtag movement, of course, the enemy is going to say, yeah, well, Blue Lives Matter. But what that means, other lives don't matter. And we wind up arguing over some silly stuff about what we mean by Black Lives Matter. Whereas if we would have said Black Power, who gonna argue with that? If we would have said this is a Black liberation movement, now we posited ourselves in a whole different paradigm of struggle. Go look at the 60s and you'll see there were very few slogans that the police could co-opt that came from the Black Panther Party, whether it was power to the people, power to all people, whether it was, when we call the landlord, when we call those who exploit people and murder people pigs. You think the police were going to say power to the pigs? They couldn't say that. We have to define phenomena and make it act in a desired fashion. That's what Dr. Huey P. Newton said that power really is in its essence. It's the ability to define phenomena and make it act in a desired fashion. So let's define those terms. Let's not come out emotionally and say things like hands up, don't shoot. I mean, no movement has been led by people who are exhibiting the universal sign of surrender as a means to express themselves. There was a reason why we used the fist and Black Power simultaneously, because the fist meant solidarity. The fist could not be unballed, okay? So we got to really be careful, young folks, that we have already won these fights. We really have. The enemy is acting on the back foot, and they're hoping that you don't have any connection to your radical history and your radical traditions to draw from. That you are basically trying to reinvent yourself and trying to deal with the times. You cannot bring back the Black Panther Party. We know that. That was a historical moment. It cannot come back. You are in this historical moment. And power is the ability to define this historical moment and make it act in our desired fashion. So I just want to say that this is not an attempt on my part or anyone's part that I know to try to revitalize the structure of the Black Panther Party, but it's an attempt to try to get you in touch with your own radical legacy, your own history, so that you could understand, hey man, we fought this fight and we won. Ask yourself the simple question, what was the name of Ho Chi Minh City before it was Ho Chi Minh City? It was Saigon, which means that the Vietnamese people had won. They won. And those of us who supported them, those of us who fought alongside of them to end the war in Vietnam, that meant that we won. So that's a victory, and that's your victory. And that's a very important victory to have, because we're getting ready to enter into another phase of global brinksmanship in a new Cold War. And it's very important that we do not get led down that rabbit hole that led our leadership down 20, 30 years ago, that resulted in the Congressional Black Caucus, an organization that is only renowned for giving a dinner every year. That's their major claim to fame. They give some smoking benefits and dinners, but getting anything done for the Black community, they haven't done anything. So please, check your history, go into your history, see your legacy. And then when you talk to the enemy like you've already won.
Thank you. Dr. Iyelli, you have social medias?
Yes, I do. I'm gonna put.
I think you're mute.
Yeah, I think she went mute too.
Sorry. Okay, so yeah, I just put my Instagram there. I'm also on Twitter at Dr. Ichile. I'm not on either of those like super often, but I'm on Facebook under my name, Iyelli Ichile. And also I want to just plug the Blacklash Collective. The Blacklash is an Africana collective of thinkers, something like a think tank, but much more focused on community-driven conversations. We have an event coming up on November 25th, where we will be addressing the topic of political organization versus reparations, for whom and for what. So that is definitely a part of a very important aspect of my work these days. Dr. Jared Ball, who's on this call, he's a part of that collective. Please join us because we need the community to be there. We have a paper that we issue every month, and we have a town hall meeting to discuss the paper and the topic in general. And I'm working on other random things. I'm about to join PACA actually, NEPA. and just continue to work with you all. I'm so happy that the African psychology students continue to keep me in the loop, even though I'm not a psychologist. I feel honored by your continued support and all the work that you're doing. So just thanks for having me.
Thank you. Nefta, do you have any social medias? How can we support your movement?
I just put a whole bunch of stuff in the chat just now. So the social media, the Cash App, all that. There's a link tree in the most prominent pages on the website. Facebook, both in Twitter and Instagram are PACA DMV. That's the organizational. My personal Twitter is at NetForFree, NETFA, FR free. People tend to mispronounce my name and misspell for some strange reason. Everybody does it, so it takes special care and practice to get it right. Don't inverse the T and F. The T comes first, and that helps to remember Netflix. Before Netflix, I just had to bear it. But anyway, and then I'm not Black Alliance. PACA is also a member of the Black Alliance for Peace, and as you heard me mention before, the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, and both those websites are under.
Okay, thank you. So now I'll turn it over to Carolyn. I think you're mute.
For our last panelist, we have Dr. Vanessa Patton-Scott. Dr. Vanessa Patton-Scott is an assistant professor in the Department of Counseling at Bowie State University. Dr. Patton-Scott holds an Ed.D. in counselor education and supervision and a master's in clinical mental health counseling. She is also a licensed clinical professional counselor and a board-approved clinical supervisor with over 15 years of clinical experience with helping the Black community overcome mental health issues related to trauma, depression, anxiety, and crisis intervention. In lieu of the discussion, Dr. Patton-Scott will hold a self-care session to decompress. If you're feeling overwhelmed and or anxious, please feel free to stay at the end. Dr. Patton-Scott.
I think we're still on mute.
Hi, everyone. Yes, thank you. Like Carolyn said, that we will have a space for anyone that needs emotional support or just a time or space to even sort out everything that you've ingested, all the great information and the strategies and everything that was discussed as far as how we can move forward as a people, but most importantly, how can we heal while we are doing the work that's needed? And so I will be available for the next couple of minutes or so, just to check in, because amongst all this work, we definitely need to make sure that we are caring for ourselves so that we can care for our community, so we can do the work that's needed. We have to be well in order to do it. So I'll be here. Thank you.
All right. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. Again, if you feel you are feeling overwhelmed or anxious, please stay. This will be a space for you to decompress. Thank you, ladies, and thank you to our advisors and everyone that has came out to our event. This was great. All 116 people that are still here on a Tuesday night. Thank you.
Wonderful job, Raven and the team.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for having me.
Thank you.
Brother Jaruba, let's hook up now. I'm gonna call you.
Okay, absolutely. You're down here in Atlanta too, right?
No, I'm in DC.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're there with Jared, down there with Jared's at. Yeah. By all means, call. I'm going to Africa the first week in December. But I'll be back in December too, because my boys are getting ready to play a championship game at after Christmas in the Dome, I hope. So I wouldn't miss that for the world. But yeah, let's try to hook up and or talk, because I think that we really have to try to pull together something, that would allow folks to get on to, and we have to take the fight to the enemy, and not just suffer their, be reactionaries and react to what they're doing. We have to put them on the foot.
Okay, I'm gonna hit you up. All right, good night, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Yes, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it very, very much. And power to the people.
Thank you.
Power to the
Thank you so
people.
much.
Thank you.
Whew. So a lot was discussed. So we just want to use this time again for you to express yourselves. If there's anything that, maybe some feelings or thoughts that maybe came up for you while you heard the panelists speak. I want to invite you to, share. How are you feeling right now in this moment? And you can say it out loud. I know we've been asking questions individually, but you can say it out loud if needed.
I'm overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed?
Yes.
Do you mind sharing more about that?
I don't even like driving anymore. I don't want to be outside anymore. If I'm inside my house, nobody's going to come get me or start accusing me of something I don't know. Because it's been a lot this year. Yeah, I guess staying indoor makes it safer for me, but at the same time, I can control only the things I can control.
So I'm hearing like great fear.
There's a lot of fear in it.
Yeah. Anyone else can share can relate to what she's expressing right now? Thank you.
Yeah, I can. I also feel under attack, especially after George Floyd and everything else. So I'm feeling overwhelmed and also under attack and fearful of the near future, and a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
I feel exhausted. Exhausted.
Yes.
I feel like we have the same conversations over and over again, and it's trying to justify how you feel, but also in part having to justify just existing. And I find it just exhausting. Like, it's almost like you exercise and there's no reprieve. It's exhausted.
I feel hesitant because it's just like, you got to be careful with whatever step you take next.
I feel like always on edge almost as well.
So almost hyper vigilant, always checking around, making sure you're safe.
Yes.
Any feelings of anger?
I think I got angry with the I know we did the first protest was in America, and then my country started their own killing and the massacre. So anger was literally running down my veins. Everybody could tell.
Yeah.
The people that spoke with me could tell, because that was just too much for me to bear. But at the same time, it's not like I'm even in the place where it's not my land, it's also not so safe. So there's no safe place anywhere. It's just a lot.
Yeah. Anyone else would like to share? Well, I want to thank those that did share, and I'm sure those that were in silent probably can relate to the feelings that were disclosed and even more. And in fact, every feeling that was disclosed is natural, even though it sounds weird for me to say that. But if you think about of all of the reminders of how we as people are viewed, how we're mistreated, constant exposure on TV. When you think that you are almost healing after hearing one story, you hear another story. You know, it's an example of racial trauma, and all of the symptoms that, or I would say, feelings or thoughts that you disclose. It just speaks to how much we're hurting and how much healing we need as people. One of the things that I wanted to share with when it comes to us as the community trying to make changes is the importance of engaging in self-care. You know, there is actually a great activist and author, Audre Lorde, and I'm sorry. Okay. And one of the things that she said that one of her famous quotes, and that I kind of go to when I'm feeling defeated or I feel like, wow, is anything ever going to change? Is she said that caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that it is an act of political warfare, you know? And so while we're all tired and we may feel defeated at times, you know, that's a natural response that our body, that our mind will have when we're facing constant horror, Black horror, you know. But we have to remind ourselves that although we may be afraid because we feel that maybe we're not safe, another way that our people are suffering is through our wellness. Because if we're not well, then we're dead anyway, right? We're not here to help anyone or even our community, which is most important. So,
Excuse me, may I interject for just a moment?
Yes.
I hear you saying these things.
I'm sorry, Dr. Cornegay. This isn't the time to interject. We actually have a
never
presentation
mind.
now.
No,
but
okay.
I do invite you to create an event, and you can have that time. Thank you.
So when you're having these thoughts and feelings, I'm just curious, is there anything that you are doing now that kind of helps you or kind of centers you when you do feel like, you know, discouraged or angry or even hopeless at times?
I use I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I use meditation. I feel like it it calms me, and the racing thoughts, I feel like I can bring them down to rest and kind of return to like a state of like osmosis or reestablishing myself. So I find that really helpful.
Thank you for sharing. Any others?
I think group therapy has actually been helpful for me because hearing everybody say talk about how they feel and things going on in their lives actually gives me a lot more hope, knowing that I'm not the only one in the situation, that there are so many things going on and mine is just a little bit compared to another person's struggle. So, and meditation has also been helpful because at the same time, when I try to meditate, I put away every other thing. And that helps me zoom away from unnecessary stress and just find myself, get back to myself, and come back to homeostasis.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi. Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I would like to add, for me, one thing that I have been reading more about is restorative yoga for healing for like racial trauma and things of that nature. And I found it very helpful for me in just, I think someone said it brings them back to a state of osmosis, in a sense, to just calm those feelings, because that stress will manifest in like physically through your health.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jasmine. So some of you already mentioned some healthy and great self-care strategies already. Meditation, I'm missing, I heard meditation. That's
Yoga.
it. Yoga, yes, thank you, which is also a form of meditation, thank you. And then I'm wondering though, how many of you registered for this panel discussion as a form of self-care? I know people are raising their hands. If you could kind of talk about that. For God, did I pronounce your name correctly? I think you're muted.
Okay, yeah. You tried, kind of. I was going to say that one other way I kind of decompress is when I'm kind of bottled up, I try to exercise. And so when I saw the other one on Saturday on self-care, was the Saturday one for the self-care one, right? The self-care is on Saturday. I mean, this other one.
That was another organization, forgot.
Oh, that's another organization.
That was another organization.
Okay, yeah, that's the Dr. Frederick one. Is that the one?
I believe so, but I know you've been going to a lot of them.
That's gonna be on Thursday. Yeah, that's gonna be on
right,
Thursday.
Dr. Phillips is Thursday, right?
Yeah, Thursday. Yes, I did that because I actually wanted to be part of that, and I'm going to register for that one because I found out the only way I can kind of decompress is when I get so bottled up and stressed out, I actually go out to exercise. Yeah. So when I saw that coming up, I quickly jumped into it. I thought that's one of the reasons I actually register for that one for Thursday. So
yeah, good. Yes. So some of the strategies, especially when dealing with racial injustice, there's some strategies that are proven to be very effective. And all these strategies are, for one, to help us, right? To help us heal, to help us kind of deal with the oppression and everything that comes with just living as a person of color. But also so that we can be available to help others. You know, I always use this analogy as like, how can you pour into others when your cup is empty, you know, or when you are on the airplane and the flight attendant always give you that spill about, you know, if someone needs oxygen, you give yourself oxygen first, right? Before you can help someone else. And so I do understand that when we hear the word self-care, sometimes our mind can go to, well, maybe that is for white people. I'm just going to put it out there. Maybe that's for the privilege, or maybe that means you are on a beach. and you are just drinking pina colada and life is good. And you're like, I did all this work, now I get to rest. But if you think of it coming from more of a collective perspective, it's that if we want to see change happen, and the panelists mentioned very thoughtful and powerful strategies, we must take care of ourselves and have a responsibility almost to make sure that our brothers and sisters are well as well. And so I kind of diverted, but as far as strategies, one, you guys already mentioned meditation is very helpful. Kind of nurturing your spirit so that you can find deeper meanings, better understanding, and just purpose in your trauma, within your trauma. And so another strategy is exercising, making sure that you sleeping. How many of you get at least 8 hours of sleep? Probably no one raised their hand. I'm jealous if you do. 8 hours? Okay, all you young folks, no. But getting enough sleep, eating the right foods, because there is a lot of research that supports that says that what we put in our bodies affects our energy, affects depression, affects anxiety. One strategy that wasn't mentioned is connecting to your culture, your community. And in this world where it can seem so dark, as if Black people are just so unloved, we have to remember who we are. And so when we connect to our culture, whether that's through literature, whether that's through music, or even coming on platforms like this and hearing from educators and from activists, it gives us a sense of empowerment, and it reminds us who we are. So that is another strategy. Giving a personal example of that, I remember when COVID happened, and then we started to maybe see, it sounded like it looked like a pattern. Every time I turned on the news, it was one person getting killed, another Black person getting killed. And it got to the point where you would think I was anti-white, which I'm not, but I did not, I needed to see my people. So I started shifting. My husband got scared and he was like, what are you doing? And what I mean is I shifted. I started listening to nothing but Black people, Black shows, everything was Black, 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 Black. But what I come to realize is it wasn't me, I don't think looking back, it wasn't that I was saying, you know what, I don't care about white people music anymore. I needed to connect. My soul needed to connect to my people in order to feel empowered, Another strategy, how many of you are still on Facebook a lot? Carolyn shakes her head, no? Okay. We have to be careful of the energy that is transferred to us. And sometimes we can even get negative and defeated energy through the media, through social media. And so we have to guard our hearts. And and we get the information, but know that sometimes it can be too much if it's not healthy for us. We may have to just take a break, okay? So I want to encourage you all to do that, especially during this time where I think today it was another case in Texas where a teenager was abused or beaten from police in Texas just today. And so I don't want to say this, I don't want to put it out, but we're probably going to hear more and more, which that's not what we want to do. We want to see, but it may keep happening. And so as people, we definitely need to guard our hearts and channel that energy in something that's going to make us more productive and more well. Is there any strategy that I didn't mention that helps you, that you would like to share for all of us to maybe consider?
I like to stay outdoors as much as possible. Social distance, of course, but outdoor activities like fishing, or being next to the water, close to the water, I should say.
Yes.
I have a bike, but I don't ride it.
Yeah. Being
I
out.
I like gardening.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I do a lot of cutting grass. So
Yeah.
I think Dr. Patton Scott, you kind of went in or spoke, gave voice to this sort of thing where essentially giving voice to your feelings in a safe space with other people, because sometimes it feels like, you know, you're crazy for feeling this way, or you're extreme for feeling this way.
Yeah.
But being around and giving voice to your feelings with other people who are supportive can, you know, kind of reaffirm that you're feeling what you're feeling.
Exactly.
And that can give comfort.
Exactly. Validate what you feel and know that you're not alone.
Right.
And so another strategy is, and I think a person already identified, Lola, I think you said this already, is therapy. She engaged in therapy. And if it's not your therapist, then maybe someone that you trust, a family friend, a loved one, or even a faith-based clergy, someone that you can talk to that can relate and empathize with you is very, very important. And you as individuals, even if you are considering therapy, it's okay to ask for a therapist that are able to see you through the cultural lens and are culturally sensitive, where you can actually talk about what's going on. Definitely. So we talked about different strategies. I actually have a form or just a little form of nuggets of strategies that you can take with you in case you need it in the future or serve as a reminder. I believe it's in the already attached to this Zoom call. But I want to encourage you all to really, really understand the importance of self-care. And it's okay to not have perfect self-care, but we definitely have to be mindful, and especially when we're trying to heal. Journaling, yes. I'm sorry, I'm getting excited because you guys are mentioning everything I forget. Journaling is very important. Dancing. Thank you guys for sharing more. Long walks, yes. And aromatherapy, yeah. Yeah. So I want to, it's pretty late already, but I do want to share this meditation practice. I'm just going to put the link in the chat, if I can find it first, that I found to be very helpful for me. And what makes this meditation practice so unique is that it has a focus on Black empowerment, Black Lives Matter. And so I thought it would be good to share that with you. So if you do want to engage in it and try it out, you can. And why can't I find the link right now? Sorry, let me see. Because I don't think we have time. Any other comments or anything that you need right now before we go?
I did want to, I guess, piggyback off of what you said earlier, Dr. Patton Scott, when you were saying that you had to make a shift into the things that you were visual or seeing every day. I think that also comes with a sense of support too, because I found myself, of course, as everybody did, wanting to shop Black and be around Black people. And I think that that allowed me a sense of support for myself too, to know that if I'm doing that, then that means there's someone else that's doing that. And that's supporting our community in a bigger way as well.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Okay, so I put in the chat box this YouTube meditation demonstration that I found to be very powerful. And I have to give her credit. It's this young psychotherapist by the name of Shani. She's out of New York. And so if you want to allow yourself to check in with that and use it, by all means, it's there for you. Christina, you mentioned you take 5 minutes for yourself when you wake up and not rush to social media. That's powerful. Yeah. Yeah. So I want to end with, I love quotes, guys. So forgive me if I'm giving you, if you don't want to hear another quote, but you're going to hear another quote. So I love this quote by Maya Angelou. And what she said is, as you grow older, you will discover that you have 2 hands, okay? One for helping yourself and one for helping others, okay? And so I just want you to take that as far as just a reminder of how you can heal while you are dealing with the effects of racial injustice, police brutality, discrimination, racism, all the above, is that while you are here trying to make a change and you want to see change, you have to help yourself as well. It has to happen at the same time, and it can, okay? So I just wanted to leave you guys with that. And I'll just end right there, yeah.
Thank you. Do anyone have any questions for Dr. Patton Scott at this time?
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all again for joining us for our part 2 event. I appreciate everyone still here. We have 45 people still here. So thank you again on behalf of APSA.
Thank you, Dr. Patton Scott.
Thank you. Good night. May you all be well. Good night, Dr. Cox. You guys did a great job. Good job.
Thank you.
Some people we may have to.
Yeah, I'm doing it now manually.